Well, I would like to invite and just say good morning and welcome everyone to this very, very special Clinicians Lounge, where we're inviting Maria VanDeman, interior designer and sales manager at OFS, and Doug Shapiro, who's host of Imagine a Place podcast. These two are the authors of Design Your World, and Design Your World is in a wonderful children's book that follows the story of Serena, who's a child who wishes who she could make more choices in her life, but struggles to find elements that she can control. She watches her grandmother design and care for her home and begins to see that unique freedom that we enjoy as professionals of creating spaces. And this child, Serena, sets out to design her very own room and a space where she has choice. So we welcome Maria and Doug Shapiro. My name's Elizabeth Johnson. I'll be one of the co-hosts for today. Julie, if you want to say hello.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Dumser, also co-hosting with Elizabeth for this very special podcast today. And we couldn't be more excited for Maria and Douglas to be here. If you haven't had an opportunity, the book is available and there's a link for the purchase on the NIHD website as well. When we just started this morning, I'll just hold it up for everyone to see.
So as Julie noted, this is available for purchase and is a wonderful opportunity to begin the seeds of design and the importance of design in the next generation. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to our guests today, Doug and Maria. Maria and Doug, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourselves, and we'll kick it off from here. Thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for everybody that came in to listen to us and to hear the story of this book, and I'm really excited about the opportunity. So thank you. As Elizabeth said, I'll give you a little context on myself. I've been in the industry for 18 years. All of that time has been at OFS, and I now host the Imagine a Place podcast there, where we explore the power of place in our lives, basically, whether it's through design or just through the stories of the people that are doing design. And it was really my first engagement of the book actually was inspired by a program called Design Your World that IIDA has created. So if you're not familiar, if you look up Design Your World IIDA, that's actually a whole separate program that shares in the mission of the book, but that's kind of the first seed that put us in that direction. And I'll turn it over to Maria to introduce herself and maybe how she got engaged and all that.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Maria VanDeman. I started my career as an interior designer, so I'm a licensed interior designer. I did workplace design, and I spent a few years doing healthcare design. So it really ties into what you all are doing as well. But I've been with OFS for about 6 years now, doing sales, doing workplace and healthcare strategy, and really started connecting with Doug in the last few years as we worked together on the Design Your World program through IIDA. And we are very strong in trying to mentor and bring diversity into the profession. And so that really ties into what we're trying to do with this book, targeting a younger age with the book.
And I'm happy to begin to tell that story, or if there's questions you'd like to use to kind of get us started, we can go either way.
Yeah, absolutely. We can segue there. And I would love, as you're telling a bit about the story, a bit deeper about the inspiration and how you guys work together to really bring this forth and working collaboratively. We'd love to hear a bit more about that as well.
Sure. I'll kick us off on that. So as I became more exposed to, or I began to understand what are some of the root causes that have led us to an industry, a profession that is really weak in terms of diversity. I mean, we really don't represent the population we design for. And a lot of it was related to exposure. And as I became familiar with the connection between exposure to design and how it impacts career choices, and how maybe parents and others might view design, I began to think of how do we approach a problem from, the lens of a child, through the lens of a child. How do we get them exposed? And obviously a children's book was exactly what I was thinking. I had written a previous book, but what I missed was I didn't grow up with that bone in my body. I didn't have that. And Maria certainly did. So it was actually, and Maria and I have always had a great working relationship. And so I called Maria and spun up this idea with her, and we began to write.
Yeah. And Doug alluded to just there being a lack of diversity in the design industry. And so just giving you those numbers, 5% of interior designers are Black compared to being 13.5% of the population. And only 3% of interior designers are Hispanic compared to being 18.5% of the population. So there's a huge gap there in what we see in our industry and what we see in the general population. And as we're designing for a diverse world and a world that is even growing in diversity, if you look at the statistics and the demographics of the world changing, it's imperative that we all think about this and that we think about the implications of who we are as a design community and who we're designing for. And so Doug, with his podcast and just, being a great communicator and just loving to have conversations with people, I think we had a lot of talks about this and what does this mean for our industry? And part of his background in having another children's book, it was just an easy segue into, okay, let's do this. We have an opportunity to do something really cool and to bring awareness to the industry. And just working hand in hand with that, I think he started a lot of the ideas behind it, but being a designer, I was able to bring some of those touches of, okay, we're not just talking about pillows, we're talking about space planning, and it's not just colors. We want to bring in, some form and function into the book. And so it really evolved into this cool story that you highlighted, Elizabeth. But also we wanted to give some tangible things within the book. So at the end, we actually explain what is interior design, just in words that are easy for children to understand. And then we have a link to a website where there's a floor plan that they can download and color and cut out a bed and color different parts of a room and arrange it on this floor plan. So not only did we want to provide a fun story for children, but we wanted to provide those next steps. And that's super important as we talk about and think about the pipeline into our industry and what that looks like for students and children.
And go ahead, Elizabeth. Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Sure. So there was there were a lot of factors as we began to think about the book and how it might serve even bigger goals, or not bigger goals, but maybe different goals. So number one, it started with how do we create exposure and create representation for our industry, and how that might play a role in hopefully leading to a more diverse and well-represented industry. But then we had other goals in mind too that are connected to that. And so the second was, how do we also position interior design as a valuable career? Because I think that's another constant struggle, is we're great at talking to each other and telling each other how valuable our work is, but we're not always the best at, how we position that career out in the world. And so part of this book was for anybody who maybe hasn't had experience with design to start to feel the value of design. And you don't have to be a toddler to appreciate that in the story, I expect and I hope that some of the parents that are reading this book to their young ones will also have that same epiphany.
Absolutely. And as healthcare designers too, that's such an important realm of interior design. I remember when I first started as a healthcare designer, I vividly remember walking into my first site visit in an acute care facility. It was an ED, and it was dingy and overcrowded, and there were hospital beds lining the hallways with people in them. And that was a huge realization of the gravity of what healthcare designers do, and the necessity of good design and holistic design and how that impacts the community. And so Doug mentioned that career value and awareness, and those things that people might not realize that we do and that we touch are so important to educate at an early age, that there is value and there is a lot of positivity that we can bring and good that we can bring through our work. And so that career awareness is so important, and that life tool, that design is not only for children can change their lives, but we legitimately can change the lives of those around us through what we do every day. And so we wanted to bring that through the story of the book and help introduce that early on.
There were two people that we honored at the beginning of the book, Cheryl Ernst and Tracy Thomas, and they each played a role in their own way of influencing the book.
No.
Cheryl through creating more awareness and activism around how do we solve this problem. And then Tracy was the one that began to really, I think, articulate, at least to me, this idea of control, and how when you're young, you don't feel like you have a lot of control. And I start to think about my own kids, and they don't pick what they get for dinner. They don't pick what they get to wear. They don't pick who they sit next to at school. And I hear about that all the time, right? Or what they do in recess, and all there's all these things that are chosen for them. And so for a young person to have something in their life that is truly theirs, that they get to control, is really special. And so I think a fun exercise is even just to ask, if you have kids or nieces or nephews, to ask them what in your life can you control? The same question that Serena's teacher asks her.
Doug and Maria, and I'm assuming you all figured out that my internet went out and I just completely dropped. So lovely when that happens and you have no warning whatsoever. But back to the book. Have you had the opportunity yet for anyone who's read it to reach out and say that their child has had a visceral reaction and wanted to create their spaces, or anyone who's been able to comment to you about how the book may have affected their children or their grandchildren?
I have an example, Maria. It's a screenshot I sent you recently when Cheryl got off a plane, which I can read.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have one, Maria.
Go for it, Doug.
All right. I want to get the words right. So, I'm sorry, but I don't want to butcher what she wrote me here.
Well, you're pulling that up. I have heard a lot of really cool stories about it. And Elizabeth, I mean, you are one of them that, when we had our initial kickoff call and talking about the reservation and the preservation, and just, it's really impactful to hear the stories that people have shared with us. And we aim to do something, very cool and impactful, but when we hear those specific stories, it's very powerful. And one example that I loved from a colleague is, he said his daughter got the book and looked at Serena and said, "She has hair like me." And even something simple like that, like how cool that we can represent an underrepresented demographic, and how cool that she recognized that that was something specific we wanted to point out through this book. And so just little things like that make it so worth it and make it make the journey more fun. And Doug has a few really cool stories too.
Yeah, ironically, the one that was just written to me was also involves hair. So it was the CEO of AIA happened to be on a plane to Vancouver at the same time Cheryl was there, and Cheryl got off the plane and she said, we saw each other, and she hugged me and said, "Thank you so much for sending me that book. My daughter wants to be Serena, and she's now putting her hair in the same, the same poofs that Serena has." And I thought that was really sweet.
That is pretty amazing. I think that I know for me, when you got to the part about grandmother's house and the baking, I thought, what child doesn't have some kind of connection with their grandmother? I mean, a lot of kids, I think baking is what they remember. But what was the inspiration behind Serena and the grandmother's part?
Well, we wanted Serena to have a struggle first. And the struggle was that question: what in my life can I control? And we wanted to even reflect on how have we experienced design. And so for me, it wasn't always in the house I grew up in, but it was in other people's homes. And so that's kind of what I'd imagined. And Maria, I don't know if you had an experience like that, but I knew when something felt different, you know?
Yeah. And going back to that feeling, I think food tends to bring people together too. You think about restaurant design, you think about the cafes of hospital spaces, and food is where we converse. And so having a strong, matriarch family and the idea of food, I think, is a great theme that we intentionally brought to the book with Serena's grandmother.
And anybody can jump in with questions,
Yeah, exactly.
I was
And
about to say,
also put your questions in the chat and we'll ask out loud for you. But if you don't have the book, get it. It is so really inspiring and probably draws a lot out of people who are of mine and Elizabeth's age group, where like, yeah, I used to do that in my room, not having a cognizant feeling that I was designing a space for me and that helped make choices in my life. Is how will the book help someone realize that this is actually a career opportunity?
Sure. So, well, I guess first that feeling of connecting to your room as, when you were younger, one of the goals, I think, for the book that was more or less like a smaller goal, but something I think was interesting, is what we'd hoped is that someone would finish the book and race up to their room. And even if they don't have that design bone or design drive, they'll take care of it differently. They'll clean it. They'll get involved in their space. And I think that can be for everyone. That's not a designer thing. That's an everybody thing. And so that was, if it just helps even a handful of kids clean their rooms, I think that's great. I'm losing track of the original question you had. But
I just said, how was your intent that the book would help someone realize this is a career opportunity?
Oh, Maria, I don't know if you want to talk about the ending.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think all the parents say amen to that. Clean up your room. But I think we're just trying to plant seeds. Not everyone is going to race out and be an interior designer. But like Doug mentioned, there's little things we can all do to control our environment. And that can look like keeping your floor clean or fixing your bed. And so we're trying to just plant seeds throughout the book. One of them being just at the end, having those tangible steps with what is interior design. If this is something you're interested in, just in the easy words of kids, what is this career path? And then I think there's a lot of next steps. There's a lot of, things in schools and art programs they can get involved in. But this is just a seed that we wanted to plant to open that door, because exposure is one of the main reasons why there's not that pipeline of students.
Mm.
And at the end of the book, we wanted the reader to see Serena in that career. And so we made a transition, basically saying that she never stopped doing what she was doing. And so this is who she is today. She's an interior designer. And so you get that. That's when the cover of the book, with the buildings and the equipment and all that starts to make sense. And it was really fun to bring that kind of finish to it. And also what we had hoped too is that for interior designers out there, as they read this book to their kids, they can have a sense of pride in sharing the work that they do.
Yeah, and I've also heard from a broker in the industry and a construction manager, and they love to see the hard hat on the book and the buildings and the crane. And, this touches architecture. There's so many related professions that this story can touch in all of design and how to use your creativity. So I don't think it just stops at interior design.
I'm guessing not. And we have a great question in the chat. Are there any physical design resources that would best accompany the book, like Legos or Lincoln Logs or Barbie's Dream House?
Oh, all those. I think anything creative goes hand in hand with what we do in design and architecture. My kids love Legos, and, they would rather build their own, random building and house instead of what's shown on the box instructions in front of them. So I think there's a ton of resources that also help to aid in that design, that creativity that kids might have.
And even just an empty vase where someone could go outside and find some flowers. And even if it's a jar of dandelions and that's what you have access to, to bring some nature in, is something that Serena does. And you can see her do that. She hung up, you can hang up art. So just, even just thinking about how do you use the art that you make, whether it's the art you make at school. So even some of the more simple things that she does inside her room are things that we all have access to in some way. And those are fun things to accompany it.
So thinking about all the book tour that you guys did and all the meet and greets, have you seen teachers or educators or other organizations do anything really creative with the book to kind of charge more inclusivity and opportunity for this next generation?
And the biggest one right now is Fresh Artists, and Fresh Artists is out of Philadelphia, but they have a network of art teachers across the country that they provide materials to. And a lot of the materials they do is they spotlight creative jobs, and they give kids access to kind of understanding what those jobs are. And so that they're looking at doing something with the book, and we actually just started that collaboration here in the last few weeks. But that's the largest one. Of course, IIDA is sharing it out, and Maria, I know we did some work with BAM. I don't know if you want to explain how they used the book.
Yeah, we have a organization here called Black Architects in the Making. It's just a local program. I'm also working with, it's called CARE Elementary, which is here in Miami, which serves underprivileged children. And we're trying to team up with different organizations to distribute the book, but also, do reading. But we also want to empower those who have the book in hand, that you don't have to be an author of this story to share this story in your community. And so Doug and I live across the country from each other. but we're still, touching our own neighborhoods with this and making sure that people who want to be champions of this message, there's books available for you. And we would love if you would champion this message in your own communities. And we would be happy to provide and help you with resources to do that. So there are a lot of people using it in really cool ways to get it in the right little hands, as someone put it. But we would love to, share this story with you, but also we want to empower you to go and use it to help people understand what you do around you.
We have a question, which I'm so glad that you asked this, Lauren, because I was curious myself. Can you tell us about the illustrator and how did you connect with the artist and what was that experience like as you were relaying your idea and she came up with these lovely drawings?
So the illustrator is a friend of mine and designer here in Miami. His name is Kenzie Leon Perry. And Kenzie is a Black designer. He did a lot of hospitality work. And throughout the pandemic, he started his own company called Z House Design. And he started to do a lot on social media, be very active in the design space. He's very creative as an artist. And so I reached out to him knowing that he really has a passion for diversity, a passion for helping to elevate, especially Black voices. And Kenzie had never done any illustrations before, but I knew he was an artist and he wanted to tackle this project with us head on. He really believed in the mission and believed that this was going to do good for our industry. And so it was a really neat process with Kenzie as we sat down and, he read through the script of the book and together we started storyboarding each page and sketching out what we thought could happen on each page. And just being the creative that he is, every time I threw out an idea of maybe we should do this, Kenzie blew my mind with what he came up with. And a perfect example is just the cover of the book. That was Kenzie's creative vision to have specific iconic buildings in Miami and specific buildings in Chicago and meshing those together with Serena skipping on top of the world and integrating the crane into holding up the sign of the book. And so he's an amazing creative himself and just did a wonderful job bringing that vision together through the visual storytelling. But he also, took some of those elements and really made them come to life with just vibrant colors and just some of the details and touches that he put into it.
Yeah, you might recognize some of the characters too. The teacher, Mrs. Thomas. Well, Mrs. Thomas was kind of named after Tracy Thomas, who the book was half dedicated to, and she looks just like Cheryl Durst, who's the other person on the book that was dedicated to, or she doesn't look just like her, but she's inspired by her, the glasses and the hair.
Did this open up any doors for Z Design? Was this something that he was aware of, that design in and of itself needed to become a little more diverse?
Absolutely. And Doug touched a little bit earlier on the Design Your World program that IIDA hosts. And part of the connection to Kenzie was that he was actually slated to be the instructor for the Miami Design Your World program here. And so when I found out that he was going to be the instructor and I was simultaneously talking to him about kicking off this book with us, it was like it was meant to be, because he was already connected to this mission of bringing more diversity into design. And so being involved in the program with IADA and then the book with us, it was just a perfect union of everyone involved in both the program and the story.
We had a great idea as well that one Lori had, that she said, we have take our kids to work day at our firm, and this will be a great addition to introducing the profession to our young visitors. So I thought that that was very creative.
That
Indeed.
is creative.
Does anybody have, you can definitely unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question or have a comment about maybe what your organization is doing for next generation cultivation and expanding our inclusivity.
We do actually have, I have a question from the group. And again, you guys are so completely engaged in this, and these questions are so spot on. Besides fun things at home, do you provide resources or opportunity options for seeing it firsthand, for seeing these designs firsthand, like shadowing opportunities or summer camps for design? Is there anything like that that you're aware of?
I mean, Maria, I guess Design Your World is now opening its third location in St. Louis. It's a high school age-oriented program, though, for kids below their teens. I don't know of I mean, Fresh Artist would be an example of it, but I don't know that it's specifically connected to design and architecture, more so art. But Maria, maybe there's something there.
Yeah, on a grander scale, I don't know anything specifically. I do know that through IIDA, there are a lot of local chapter initiatives, and Miami is doing one where we go into middle schools and high schools and we do just workshops about design. And so we've introduced the book. We also have just a slide deck that we go through about what is design, but it's geared toward more that middle school, high school level. And so I think what is really successful are these grassroots movements where there's a group of people that get together and have a vision and see a need and start targeting those schools or those aftercare organizations who do this. And I've just even reached out to a few here locally, but they're always looking for professionals to come in and give advice and help support their students. It just helps to make their curriculum more interesting and exciting. And so if that's something that you're interested in, pioneer that, go for it. I think there's such a need there. And so not only should we all be looking for those, but how can each of us get involved?
I agree. Sometimes the question sparks the grassroots. And so this is very encouraging. Again, along those lines with the shadow opportunities, I'm wondering if as designers of spaces, either like Serena did with artwork and movement of furniture and things like that, talk a little bit about how to connect appropriately with clients when you are trying to understand what their spaces need.
Can you expand on that question?
Sure. I'm just sort of asking if you have any techniques about understanding what is it that the space really needs to be able to serve the population well. How do you pull that out?
That's a great question. I think the best way is to get a very comprehensive view of what is needed. And I think that involves talking to a lot of the user groups that are involved in that space. Oftentimes the leaders don't really know what happens in the day-to-day. So you have to talk to the people who are using it, the people who are coming there. And I think the more you can get that cohesive, inclusive approach that involves everyone, the more that our designs will reflect everyone. And sometimes I know that's hard to do. There's time constraints, there's, different roadblocks in the way. But when we think about inclusive design, I think the more people that we can engage so that it's a holistic approach to what we do, I think the better the outcome is.
I agree. Inclusive design, I feel like, has much more to do with the process and the profession than it does the outcome. And I think that's where sometimes people get hung up. They're like, well, what are examples of inclusive design? And it's like, the examples are maybe not what you see in the space, but it's how they went about it, and then the people that were responsible for doing it. And so, building more inclusive design means building a more inclusive profession first, but then a more inclusive process to follow.
Absolutely. And I know this example isn't healthcare related, but I was just at a job site for a university project. They did a cultural center. And for each of the spaces, they specifically engaged user groups from the various demographics. So they engaged Latinos and Black and LGBTQ+. And they specifically sought out the different user groups in those spaces. And so each space reflected all of those users that they had engaged with and interviewed along the way. And so, like Doug said, I think the process is really what makes a design inclusive.
Liz, is any of this, I don't know how much you've shared with a challenge of creating trust with some of the population that you work with, and are these things echoing along those lines?
Oh, absolutely. And I know, Maria, you and I had talked about it a bit when we met. Yeah, so in rural and reservation communities, there's a lot of mistrust because we have outsiders that are coming in, may not understand cultural context or why we have things a certain way. And it can really make it twice shy, if you will, for the next group that's coming in. So having that participatory design with the community, understanding their networks and their resources and what meaningful design is, from, like you said, the grassroots, the true foundation of the community, is the real way of not only creating long-lasting trust, but also that impactful, more ripple change that sometimes takes longer, but that patience really pays off. So kind of thinking about that, where do you guys see this type of movement that you're making, starting at a children's book? What type of ripples do you guys want to see maybe in 5 years or 10 years?
I hope, first, I guess I hope people write about their careers and talk about their careers in design and put it out in the open. And I hope it inspires more people to write more books. I mean, it's not one book isn't going to do the trick. It's not one thing. It's everybody doing something. And Maria and I talked about this too. We were like, what we made wasn't, I mean, I want to say it's special, right? But I'm going to say this, what we made was way less special than just the fact that we did it. And so I think if you want to do something, you can do it. And that's the hardest part, or I think, but at the end, that's the most special part, even if it doesn't have the impact that you hope it has, but you did something. And I think that's how we went into this, feeling like, nobody may see this book or everybody, but we're just happy that we're doing something. It felt good. And so I hope it inspires some of that, I guess, from an adult level. And then, I don't know, Maria, love to hear what you think too.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. We want to see the diversity in our industry rise. And I think the beauty of diversity is that it brings more thought and it brings more experience, because those different backgrounds are truly what make the difference when you look at, the millions of studies that show that diversity is a good thing. And race and social upbringing and gender, they all play into that diversity of thought and diversity of experience. So I think it's a huge push in our industry right now for that, because it benefits everyone. But then I also think about the inclusion aspect of that and the retention aspect of that. And so are we really being inclusive of the people that are here? And sometimes I like to swap out the word inclusion for the word invite, because I think that, we all think that we're inclusive and kind and nice, but it really takes effort to be inclusive. And sometimes that means inviting and getting outside of our own comfort zones to, talk to someone who's different than us, who looks different, who grew up different. And so maybe that's not, a group outing, but maybe that's a one-on-one interaction where each of us have the power to create culture and to be inclusive. And so not only are we trying to grow diversity in our profession, but we're also trying to say, hey, it's everyone's job to be inclusive. And that's something that's very easy to do, but it also takes effort. And so if we invite and if we name drop, in positive ways, people who are doing exceptional things, and if we invite different people into our circles, I think that we all have a role to play in that, through the retention of people, the inclusion of people as we grow the diversity in our industry.
Maria, as you talk about that, I'm thinking about our audience here. And Casey, I'm going to call you out just because I know that you work in a multi-system. So talk to us, Maria and Doug, about when you are designing for a place that is a multi-system. How do you change how you approach it, knowing that each of them have a different kind of population for what their clientele?
I think that everyone is deserving of good design, whether you have a very small budget, whether you have a huge budget, no matter where the actual building sits. I think everyone should have good design, and that can be done no matter what price tag is put on a space. But I think it goes back to engaging the different user groups, and design isn't this monolithic thing. Design is dynamic. And I think when we engage the people in the process, but also think about the colors and the art and the spaces. And when we look at a design from all of those aspects and engage the users in it, then no matter where the building sits or what demographic you're serving, we can have good design, and we can have design that's reflective of where that's sitting.
Casey, you're on mute if you were saying something to us about that.
No, and I'll just share, because we are in multiple different cities, and one of the things that we've done is actually taking pictures of the area and children of the area, and that's what's on our walls to help bring in what that community is. Even though we have standards across an entire system, we try to infuse some local flavor in there.
I love that. Yeah, and many facilities have very strict standards. Every facility looks the same no matter where you go. But I think you can get creative, just like that, Casey, with how you adapt to each area. So I think the art is a good way to bring that in.
Do you find that the clientele, be it either healthcare, which obviously we're focused on, or in the hospitality or any other types of business, how do they receive commentary from their patients about what the design is like after they're already in the environment?
I can't answer that, but I'll see. I'll see if Maria can.
I think it really depends on each situation, because it's very different depending on the demographic, depending on the facility. We do a lot of what we call more homeful design, bringing that feeling of home into the facility where people don't feel like they're at an institution, but they're warm and welcomed. And so you're always going to get opinions across the board. You can't make everyone happy. But again, going back to the process of, are we doing our due diligence to make sure that the things that we have the power to change, we are adapting them to the people and for the spaces we're designing in?
Do any of the regulatory agencies sort of affect what you are able to design for any given space?
I mean, absolutely. You're in one of the markets that has the most restrictions and the most regulatory red tape. So absolutely, there are things that we can't do as healthcare designers. But, colors and fabrics and finishes and artwork, those aren't always as restricted. So I think you always have to work within the regulations you're given, but there's always opportunities for good design and to bring in some of that sense of the culture. And like Casey said, bring that community into the space.
Yeah, there was a quote from an interview, a gentleman named Todd Heiser from Gensler that I interviewed. And he talks about colors, patterns, textures. And he said, just by having a variety of these things, whether it's your wardrobe or your space, it just communicates that the world is a big place. And I love that connection that he feels between those things. And I think it does communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
So as what was the elephant in the room, it's starting to walk away a little bit. But when we think about the pandemic, what has that done to how you approach? Because I know as I have toured a number of institutions, there's that big furniture graveyard for those pieces that couldn't survive the cleaning that was necessary. So how has that affected the design business?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and we have a couple people that are very closely connected to the product side of our business who could weigh in here. And I don't know, Stan or Lauren, if you're tuned in and want to answer that.
And I think a lot of it depends on where you are in the country too. I drive an hour, and how they treat COVID is very different than how they treat it in Miami. And so I'm sure it's all across the board, but Stan can hop on and give us a few comments about what he's designing for.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, thanks for asking me. I think, like Julie said, that elephant is starting to walk away slowly, but it's still there. There's still that concern, obviously, across facility management, and how products will hold up to cleaning. Obviously, a lot of facilities change their cleaning protocols, through and after or since the pandemic. So, materiality's become a big thing. It always was, I think, in healthcare, but I think we're starting to see it spread into other vertical markets, workplace, higher education, hospitality, especially. So, we're designing around the idea that it's got to stand up to the most stringent cleaners or cleansers. And, everything from solid surface materials to, whether it's plastic materials, polyurethane materials, the fabrics chosen. And obviously all of those things can create a product and add to the aesthetic of the space that's not only beautiful, but functional as well. It's going to withstand the test of cleaning and time.
Yeah, and we're also designing for a nursing workforce who is leaving in droves. We have a really great white paper from Carolina about the state of the industry, and it has to do a lot with the nurses that are leaving. And so when you talk about design, how do we retain nurses through space? And there's a lot of thought put into the specific design of different caregiver spaces. You know, how do we create community and retention, and so that we can keep people in their jobs to serve our communities. So I think they just dropped a link in the chat with that goes to that white paper, but it's a really nice resource just explaining the design and how caregivers are such a big component in this, and how do we design for them.
I appreciate the insight, Stan, very much. Liz, I have kind of dominated with the questioning. Do you have any over there?
I was just going to open it up, excuse me, to the audience if there's any other reflections off of, we've covered a lot of information today and through the book, and my personal reflection is I was so happy to see the multi-generational component of the book. It really reflects a lot of our population, being able to learn culture and tradition from, you know, an older generation, but able to have their own control and their own interpretation of their culture. So I was very excited about that part of the book and how that will resonate with the children in my area. But I would love to hear from the audience and those on the phone of how they may see themselves helping support the next generation of designers and ultimately our colleagues and those who will be designing our healthcare spaces.
Yeah. Or I would also love to hear too, if there was a book that you can remember as a kid that had an impact on your career or your choices. It would be fun to hear that book from you and just to nerd out on any of those books that you might have.
I love that.
This is Chris Crail, and I'm an NIHD board member and a nurse, and have been practicing in the design industry for a while. But I'll quickly make a comment and tell a short story. When I first joined the architecture firm that I worked for, and this goes back 13 years, you know, an open floor plan, and I was stunned that I was in the middle of New York City and was joining a workforce that was all white. It blew me away. And when I talked to one of the partners about how come there aren't any other people working here, she said, well, you know, minorities, people of color, they don't go into the design fields. They don't go to architecture school. And my response was, well, then, as a profession, it's your responsibility to figure out how to get those students to apply for and, you know, embrace that as a career and, you know, think that that's a job and an opportunity. I mean, in nursing, we've always done that. We've done that for a variety of different kinds of people, including men. When, you know, I became a nurse many decades ago, and there were like no men. And there were initiatives to very specifically and purposefully get them into our profession. So as you know, what you're doing is in your own individual way, you know, you talk about this is just a book, but it's also, you know, hopefully one of many, many books. I mean, I would love to see this turned into a series. I want to be involved in the, you know, build your world and transition your world and redesign your world and renovate your world. And, you know, there's numerous, and engineer your world and all kinds of things. So I think it needs to be a series. And the book the children's book, you talk about influence. I'm a miniaturist. That's a hobby. And so I'm always trying to figure out how can I look at something big and make it small. And a book that impacted me was Goodnight Moon, because, you know, the book takes place in one spot, and it's kind of, you know, it's got three colors. It's yellow, green, and red, and it's very geometric. And I would take construction paper and try to recreate the room in that book. When I wasn't little. I was like in junior high school and high school. So that's the book that influenced me. So thank you for letting me have the floor.
I love your thought process. Absolutely love your thought process. And I love the idea of the continuation of this series. I mean, it's a fantastic idea, Christina. Thanks for sharing that.
Doug and Maria, is there a way for the population here, the NIHD members and everyone who's out there, to be able to communicate with you, to follow up on some of the things that we might go out and do now that we have our hands on this book and the background?
I'm very accessible on LinkedIn. I think that's the easiest way to probably find me and communicate. And so I think that's probably the best avenue for me.
Yeah, same. I'm on LinkedIn, Maria VanDeman. You all also have my email address from this, so you're welcome to share that too. I'd love to hear how anyone is reaching students through this.
And Christina, I'll just also say, you know, and your feelings and your questioning and your, you know, the responsibility that you're putting on the profession, I think it's the right place to put it. And it goes into education too. Like what are we feeding? What are we teaching our kids? What are we celebrating? And is that reflective of the diversity that we hope to have in the professions? And I'll tell you, based on programs I've witnessed and been a part of, that it's not yet. And so education and architecture and design that we celebrate and teach needs to become more diverse. So it's also there. They need to go through this evolution. But I'm glad you were inspired. So thank you.
Liz, would you like to close out?
Yeah, I just really want to thank Doug and Maria for your time today, and would love to give you just another opportunity of any final or concluding thoughts that you'd like to give our members and those of the public today.
Well, we definitely want to thank you for being here, for caring about this talk, but also just we hope you're able to share the book, share this mission, and use it as a tool to spread awareness and, you know, build diversity within our industry. Someone threw the link to the book in the chat, the link to some Carolina pages. So definitely follow up on that. And we would love to hear ways that you're all working to inspire the next generation too.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you
so much. We appreciate everybody's time today. We encourage you to go purchase the book and also look at the Design Your World podcast for more inspiration. Thank you so much, Maria and Doug. And for the rest of you, take care, and we'll see you at the next Clinicians Lounge.